Welcome to Rook's Health. As always, I'm Farouk, the host of the podcast, and the host of these interviews I'm going to be doing about the whole immigration process and job application, specifically geared towards international applicants, international students, who make that transition into the UK healthcare workforce. And today I have with me Justin, who is also another physiotherapist like myself and who has undergone the same process of immigration, of job application, sponsorship, and the whole 9 yards, which make up everyone's life slightly a little bit more difficult if you're not from UK applying for a job. But I'll let Justin introduce himself now and tell us what he does, how long ago he did the application process, and what was it like?
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all virtually. My name is Justin. As Farouk said, I am also a physio. I have been here in the UK for more than 6 or 7 months. I have recently started an application. So from a job application perspective, I started on last year around February, March, and started to apply around mid-May. That is like a very brief process, which may be a little bit more harder to explain, but I guess we'll just go through that later.
Yeah. We'll have quite a few things that we want to touch on this video. Like the first one being, obviously everyone knows that if you're international, if you're an international student, for example, and you're coming to the end of your course and you're trying to do the application to get a job, which a lot of people are trying to, if you've studied here for over 3-4 years now, most people would want to carry on working or at least get some experience here. That process can be often quite difficult or quite, in a sense, difficult to maneuver because of all the extra stuff you have to know. And it's kind of pressure racking as well because you don't want to make a mistake. Now, for you, when you did the application a similar time with myself, but everyone has a slightly different experiences going through it because some people might have to go through it on their own. Some people might have support. Some people might use lawyers. There are loads of avenues. Now, for yourself, what was the one thing you found that was very difficult or the biggest challenge while you were doing that initial phase, particularly the job application phase, before you can even get to the immigration side of things?
Yeah, as you guys can imagine now, it is a pretty long phase. And from the very start, I always knew that I wanted to work in the UK because of the levels of service that it could provide. And I feel like I am able to develop more as a physio right here. I am not going to lie, it is pretty hard to find a job, especially during that time, interestingly enough. I had to really put myself out there. So I think I wrote about 30 personal statements, 30 applications. It was pretty tough. And I think I would say your motivation for myself is the hardest part because after you have written 5 and then you have sent and there's no news back or it sort of probably say, you actually didn't make it to the next stage of interview. It can be quite disappointing. So that is one of the things that I had to overcome for myself is to keep going because if you know that you have got good qualities, you match the job person spec, there is always going to be a job for you.
There's an opportunity. And that's the honest truth. If you're applying for a job, the job markets can be difficult to maneuver without having to worry about immigration. But if you're an international student, for example, it becomes exponentially more difficult because the reality is when the employers are looking at different things, they're factoring multiple things. Am I right? When they're looking at, the first thing they'll look at is, do you need a sponsor? Because that is an extra process in itself where you're international as opposed to someone who's home that can probably start within a month or start. You're not going to be able to start in a month if you're coming. And we both know this because the waiting time will even take longer than that already. So, These are the few things straight off the bat that you're going to have to do. And I think you touched on it well, saying, you're going to send a lot of applications. I know myself that I sent out a lot of applications. A lot of them you don't hear back from. Some of them they just tell you, unfortunately, we're not able to sponsor. And some of them you go to the interview and do the interview, but still end up with disappointment. Did you have any experience like that where, you've gone through the whole application process, or how did you deal with the rejection or that part of it when you get to the application point and you've done everything and you're actually done the interview, but you still have, that sponsor, that international aspect is the barrier.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to you, Farouk, because I have been through similar cases like yourself, and I feel like I think at that point it's sort of made me realize that this is the reality of the job market. Not everyone is able to provide that sponsorship, because if you consider from their perspective, they still need to have that fund. They still need to have available funds to sponsor an international applicants. And like you said, it's extra work, it's extra effort. And I don't think they have any obligation to do that for you. So I just feel like you need to really find that employer that is willing to do that. Either they are really short of staff, that might be a good opportunity for you to get in if you meet obviously all the job criteria. So I'm really grateful for my current employer that they are able to bring me in through the process.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, because everyone, there's no obligation for them to take you on. If anything, it depends on where the trust is, where you are. There are a lot of different factors that come into play as to whether or not a trust or a hospital or an employer is going to say, no, we really do need you, so we're going to take you on. And obviously, everyone knows that the demand for healthcare professionals far outstrips the supply of healthcare professionals. Because every year, I'm sure you've probably noticed this, almost every department I've been in is always short-staffed somewhere. I've not met a full department which is fully staffed. Every single position is filled. So that's where the opportunity is. However, someone else is also going for that position as well, and they're a home student, so they have a natural advantage over you. And it's not even they know more or they're more qualified. You may be more qualified than them, but I don't know if you've probably heard about this, where they have to prove to the Home Office that they've actually looked for someone who's a home student before considering you. So you're already at the bottom of the pecking order, if we're being honest. So you then have to push even further. Are you familiar with that sentiment where you have to?
Yeah, 100%. Because like I have seek sort of advice when I wasn't able to get any jobs at that point. I have seek advice from some professionals who had held like high posts in the NHS, so they know what the process is like. Yeah. So I would say for myself, it's always knowing that there is going to be a demand. So you're just going to keep going. But yeah, if you sort of, if you can see from the employer's perspective, they actually have a lot to do. Like you said, they have to prove that they have tried to secure and try to recruit someone else from the local pool before going to yourself. Although there is a good point that I wanted to raise, is that a lot of trust right now, which is a good sign that they are trying to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion, whereby they sort of interview based on merit points. And this is where they get, this is where you can play to your advantage, because at this point, they aren't really looking for anyone local or international. They are looking for someone who is really qualified. And I guess this is, I think some of the trust, they would just state there down in their job application that they support this initiative. This is the one that really, for myself, I really paid a lot of attention to. Okay. I'm not sure if you are aware of this, Farouk.
Well, I wasn't too familiar. I know, diversity and equality and inclusion are being pushed significantly now across the board. And the interesting thing of when I applied was, I applied at the cusp of when the health and care visa was just starting, and in the midst of this pandemic, so things were moving kind of fast either way. So I think things, that's the thing, things are always changing, and trust that they're always trying to recruit new policies. So as I said, this time actually, if you tried to apply 2 years ago, it would have been more difficult being a healthcare worker, no doubt. However, now is a time where things are a lot easier with the whole, even the job application side, because they're looking for different things. But one thing I wanted to even touch on with you is, I think that's a good point about that this is a good time, was, were you willing to move far away from your, because when I was doing the application, so I applied everywhere. I just went on NHS jobs and Band 5, and then just sending with geographical location. And that's something sometimes people don't want to go. They don't want to go far. How was your thinking because I literally applied for a job in Wales? Did I really want to move to Wales? Maybe not, but there was a job available there. If I got it, I would probably move. I didn't really mind. Was that something you factored very much, location wise?
You're so much keener than myself, but yeah. So, yeah. But for myself, I see. So my kind of mindset was like, as long as I have got a job, I could always progress from there.
Yeah.
And it's similar. Like if you wanted to get into a sports, and I know that we are sort of going off tangent right here. It's about getting your foot through the door. That's the most important thing. So for myself, I don't really really care where I'm at, as long as I know that the trust values aligns to my practice. And I have location, right? Because I graduated from Bradford, so anywhere near Yorkshire is the best. And I have received some offers from that area, but I think for someone who is wanting to start working in the UK, I think it's best to have that mindset whereby you really need to keep your head down, start with a job, and then progress from there. Is what I would say.
Yeah, particularly if you're international, coming from that background, a home student here, or if you're already international student, or you're coming from somewhere else. Because when you get in, it's a lot easier, I would say, to then, if you wanted to then change jobs or something like that. We'll get to that. I know you're first, we'll get to that in a sec, but then it's a lot easier. But once you can, get your foot through the door in a job, and then you already established, you maybe getting some experience, then you can then start saying, okay, then you can have more preference. And I don't like saying that, but it's the reality where you kind of almost have to take what you're giving, as long as, it's lines, as you said, lines up with what you believe in, but you kind of have to take what you're given sometimes. Now, that's a bit of the job application side. And obviously, what was the one thing, I know you already said that you found that difficult. Did you find anything else difficult in that job application before we move on to more of the immigration side?
I think, speaking from my personal experience, it's always about the job application. Like I said, it is quite hard to get one. But I think, just to conclude what I said about the job application part, it's all about myself. Yeah. It's my personal barrier that I need to go through, and I don't really want to put any blame on any organization for not taking me. Because ultimately, it could be yourself who is not qualified. So what you need to do is get better and be more qualified until the employers will look at the both qualifications and say, yes, this is the one that we're looking for. And no matter what, we are willing to sponsor him. We are willing to put our efforts in. So I would say not so much on a blame mentality, but how to get yourself better is what I would say.
Yeah, I like that idea. It's because it's very easy. I mean, I had interviews where I got rejected, but some of those interviews I got rejected was because I didn't know enough about the area. I'll give an example, but it's me reflecting on myself and saying I have to, because when you come from either international abroad, home, I keep driving home this point. You want to be the best. You want to be, the best above reasonable doubt. Where they're going to look at your application and say, this dude is way too qualified for us to pass on. Exactly, like you nail the interview, you nail the personal statement, you nail everything, and then at that point it becomes a case where you're de facto the best, and then they have to start finding reasons why they can't, or they'll start looking for reasons why they should employ you and justify amongst themselves. I think probably I'm not to pat myself on the back. I think I did that with where I'm working now, where I proved, and I think I aced that interview so well that so by the end of the interview I already know I have the job. But I think multiple things came into play where they probably they needed staff, and I was good enough. Then they were just like, yeah, we're going to look into the whole process for you of sponsorship and all that, and you leave it there. But I love that driving home. The blame mentality is not there, because you will have rejections, and I would be very impressed. I mean, I would say 99% of people will have one or two at least rejections. If you apply for one job, got that job immediately, you're very lucky. You are not in the majority.
Very, very lucky.
Yeah, you're like you're an anomaly on the chart of the job application aspect. Let's move into the immigration side, because obviously I think they both work. What's the word I'm looking for? Coherent? No, in accordance with each other, and they both run perpendicularly. However, obviously the job application part is the first part, but you also still need to be aware of that immigration part, because a lot of the times you might get caught off. For example, if they ask you a question in the interview, or towards the end, are you a home student, or what do you need, or what's your visa status, or things like that. and you can't answer, or you don't know enough about sponsorships or what you even need, it's not gonna look very well, because then you're putting a lot more emphasis on them to go and start finding out. And if they say, you don't know enough, we can't even help you with that. What would you say during that immigration part was the toughest parts? If we're talking things like, getting sponsorship, getting all your documents together, sorting out, the actual immigration and visa application side, and doing all the research. What was the hard parts for you?
Yeah, just to echo on what you said, I would say it is equally hard, because both of them go hand in hand. Without one, you wouldn't be able to go through the other. For myself, one of the big things is the fees. So when I applied for mine, I had to pay the application fee. That's the first one, and something called IHS, so the Immigration Health Surcharge. That is something that I had to pay forward. And I know that IHS, if you apply for a tier 2 visa at that point, they will still refund you back, but it is still a large sum of money to pay forward. So that is one of the things that I am taking into account. The other thing was the uncertainty of the length of the application, because right now, sorry, I am just speaking from experience. So at that point, you were given like a time frame, and they aren't able to guarantee you that you will be able to receive the results of your application within, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks. And I think it doesn't help when you ask more people, and people say, oh, I have got it in 3 weeks. And the other people would say, oh, no, I've been waiting for 2 to 3 months. That doesn't help either. These are the two big things. And the third one, I would say, it's knowing where to get your information, because yes, there is a general guideline, so your Gov website, where there is loads of information, but knowing which information is relatable to you, that is a hard bit, because there are so many information. And if you go and look on Gov website, there are so many types of visa, and you don't even know which one it's actually applicable to you. Yeah. So at that time, I was applying for a tier 2 general visa. So tier 2 brackets general visa. And I right now just touching on a bit on what I am applying. It's the tier 2 health and care visa, just to put a bit of clarification out there.
Yeah, I think, I had a similar thing where I think I told you this the last time we talked, where 2 weeks or a week before, I think I made my application on like a Thursday, and by the next week, that was when the health and care visa came out. So for those who are listening now, I'm sure you touch on that when we get to the last part, we're talking about what's happening now. Where back then you would just before, when I was applying, you had to pay the IHS surcharge, and that was depending on how many years your contract was. If you, for example, had the job contract was giving you 5 years, and you were going to apply for a 5-year visa, you would need to pay for 5 years of health surcharge. However, and we'll touch on that a bit, the new health and care visa, which is, I think, one of the better things that could happen, eliminates that IHS health surcharge, because your health worker, I think they realized it was a whole big thing. I kept following the news where people were arguing that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to pay to use the NHS if you were going to work in the NHS and be providing a service of care, and you have to pay thousands of pounds to use the thing you're in already, which kind of seemed counterintuitive. But that's how it was for since beginning up until last year. And that's one of the good things that's happening now, where you don't have to pay that anymore. I had to pay it, but I got mine back. And I think the next thing you said was the timing. Times are the realistic thing you have to put into account of, it's not going to be a quick 1 week, 2 week thing. Even if they say, health and care visa, I'm sure you've seen it where they say 3 weeks. Yeah. I don't believe it'll be 3 weeks, if I'm being realistic. I mean, mine said, my other friend who literally did the health and care surcharge thing, he said 3 weeks, and he's calling me 3 months later or 2 months later and saying that, oh, have I gotten mine yet? And I said, oh, I haven't gotten. I didn't even put it into my mind. And when I finally got it, he was waiting for it, so it wasn't 3 weeks. And that's mainly because we're in a pandemic, and I think there's a backlog of people they have to do. So before things start settling down, where they actually got 3 weeks is actually 3 weeks, I don't know how long it is it's gonna take. But I know you now, you're in the process of doing the health and tier 2 health and care visa. Can you talk a bit on that? What that entails for you?
Yeah, that's fine. So I have been quite fortunate again to be offered another new job nearer to my university, which is obviously helps. So I've came across, did a bit of research on health and care visa, watched lots of videos, went onto the website and stuff like that. I would say my experience right now, I would say it's much easier because I am coming from a point whereby I hold a tier 2 general visa. So I am imagining like all my documents are already uploaded in their cloud or anything. And I think having done twice, so including my tier 2 student visa, I would say I am a bit more experienced right now. There's going to be less fees because there isn't going to be IHS. And I would say there are more information right now, more and more coming up from the Gov website, from the Home Office itself, and hopefully from this video, this podcast, more and more people would know more about this visa, and definitely less documents. Speaking from experience, because I literally just went to the biometric center, and all I need to provide was my passport and my biometric residence, my BRP. Yeah, so I would say it's a much more smooth, easy transition from a tier 2 general visa to health and care visa. Obviously, I am not coming from, let's say, a tier 4 to a tier 2 health and care, so I'm not too sure about that. But if you are looking to change your employer, looking to change your job, but still remaining in that healthcare sector, I would say it is a pretty good transition from the application perspective, because I am still waiting for the decision to be made, which hopefully, fingers crossed, will be successful. But yeah, that is my experience so far. Definitely much easier, I would say.
That's the key thing right there, that it is a lot easier. And I didn't know particularly, I didn't think it would be that. I knew, had a feeling, because you just applied and you already did it, you were already on tier 2, general, and now you're coming to the health and care. I didn't realize you don't need that much documents, because the paperwork is one of the things that is very daunting sometimes. When you have to start filling in long booklets of forms, you have to fill this, you have to provide this, you have to provide bank statements, you have to provide a lot of things when you're doing it normally. I assume maybe that's the first time, because obviously that makes sense. But you have to then do biometrics. I mean, I was lucky enough where they were trying out a new system for the biometrics, where I just needed to do it because I already had a tier 4 visa, and I had visiting visas in the past where all I needed to do was, do the biometrics via face on my app, download an app. I know normally you would have to go into the embassy, is it the embassy, or you have to go to a center, basically. Center you went to?
Yeah, so I think it is quite similar to my tier 2. So on my tier 2, I had to basically go to a third party sort of company. And on tier 2, because I am from sort of Asian background, what I went to was a company called VFS. But right now, transitioning from a tier 2 general to a tier 2 health and care, it's called UK VCAS, if I'm not mistaken. And there's basically a lot of centers all around the UK. I've been to Nottingham because there was, luckily enough, there was an appointment available right there. So I had to pay for a certain amount of fees. I think it's ranging from £75 to 135. That is the thing that you need to pay. I think because coming from a tier 2 general, I would need to redo my biometrics. I'll need to take a photo, put my finger, stuff like that. So I will still need to do that, but obviously it is much cheaper compared to applying for a tier 2 general, where I had to go to a VFS center back home in Malaysia, and then sort the same thing out, really. But yeah, again, much more easier. And when you're in the UK, it is quite accessible, I would say, albeit we are in a pandemic.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. That's sort of another day, but I imagine applying from the UK already is a lot. I would say it's like makes life a bit easier than applying from abroad, because
100%.
But unfortunately people would have to do, and that's something I'll talk about later on the channel, but we'll leave that for another day. But yeah, that's a very interesting thing, and that's something you have to consider as well. Those possibility of traveling long distances, paying the fees of all these little fees, and they both, as I said, now it's a bit cheaper. It's not a bit, it's a lot cheaper without paying that IHS surcharge. That thing is thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
Thousands of pounds. But now you're only considering, your visa fees, your biometrics fees, and little things like that. And, we can have a separate talk about another time about specific fees you need to be aware of and how they can rack up when you go through a bit more of the process and see what that's like. But these are all the multiple things you have to consider when you're doing this application, because it's not straightforward. I keep saying it's not a straightforward thing, it's not directly, immediately straightforward, but you have to do the research around, watching videos. Hopefully this one is helpful to someone, at least, if not one or two people. But and it's the whole shebang. And if you do it alone, it's slightly a bit more challenging. But I mean, I think been very good and dropped some very interesting topics. I mean, overall, before we wrap things up, what would you say? Have any tips or advice for people who are about to either do the process for either starting, from straight out of uni or coming abroad or actually changing from one visa to the other or changing job? What advice you got?
That's a good question right there, Farouk. I would say for myself, definitely seek advice from someone who has already done it. Speak to someone else who has possibly has or knows someone who has experience in doing all this, no matter what type of visa, but just the whole immigration process as a start to get a very, very basic idea. Hopefully with this video coming out, this podcast coming out, more and more people would know. In terms of job application process, I think reflecting on my past experiences, I would say definitely start with why. So why do you want to come to the UK and work? What's the benefit? What can you gain from it? What's the pros and cons? What I would suggest doing practically is just to write all these things down into a piece of paper, and then ask someone else that you trust, ask someone else that you would seek advice from, and ask them to give you feedback, really. And then I would say ensure you understand the timeline. So from a job application process, what are you going to do? What are you going to expect? What sort of documents do you need? And sort of prepare them in advance, so that, which links to my next point, so that you have that expectation. Because I was feeling quite anxious because I don't have that expectation. I thought it was going to be done in like 2 weeks. But it sort of, obviously that wasn't my expectation anymore. So it's really good to have that expectation. How long does it take? How much money do you need to prepare to have in your bank account? What sort of documents, really? But really have that expectation, seek advice, and really know your reason. It's some of the tips I would give to someone who is looking to work in the UK.
I think that's overall great advice. And the two ones that I will drive on a bit was, one is that timing, because that timing is very essential. When I say it's very essential, and it starts straight from once you want to apply for jobs, or when your visa is about to end. For example, if you're a student and your visa ends September, you don't want to get to August, you don't want to get to July and then start applying for jobs.
Yeah,
the time frame is not going to be very favorable for you. You're going to be in a very tight window where you have to get the job within a month, for example, and then also make the application, because from what I remember, you have to have made the application before your visa ends. So if my visa ends September 1st, you need to have made that application today, at least the day before September 1st. Because if you make it even a day after, technically, obviously it comes down to, then it will come down to a bit of personal and what the government decides to do. But technically you're in kind of violation, because you need to make that before your visa ends, because you don't want any troubles, because that's the last thing you want. You don't want any issues like that. So timing things very ahead of time. And like versa, if you're coming from abroad and you want to get a job, you don't want to leave things too close. And time is always a big thing that you have to factor in, because you start things way too early. But I guess if you're coming from abroad, it always depends on circumstances you're coming from. Theoretically, do you have more time to take your time, slow it down? And obviously, even though time is a big effect, you don't want to rush it, because the last thing you want to do is rush things too fast. In terms of getting a job, if you get the job fast, I don't have any problem. You rush to get a job, because you have the job, but you don't want to rush that immigration documents, getting all this money in your bank account, because all these type of things, you don't want any reason for them to deny your visa. You want to make sure that you've done everything within your power, and then anything is out of your control unless you give them a reason. So you're coming from abroad as well. Take your time, you know, make sure you have everything laid out, make sure all the documents, and that's something we can talk about in another interview later on down the line, is some of those fees you have to be aware of, and I'll make a separate video about that. Fees, you have to be aware of, time scales, rough time scales you have to be aware of, just so that you can give yourself the best preparation moving forward and you don't feel rushed, because that's a nightmare.
Another thing I would say is if you're looking to really start the process, I think it's best to speak to someone like your lecturer or any sort of visa support group that you have in your university. That is always a good start. If not, then you need to be proactive as well. Go online, search for information, ask from anyone that you know would be a great place to start as well. Don't know if you agree with that.
Oh, absolutely. I think, universities, they have good support systems. Some of them have, at least. I know some do where they have, I won't speak for all. I'll say, at least mine, I think there was some support where you could have, I think the careers department had some idea about the whole process. So they could give you some advice, because they've probably seen multiple students go through that whole process. So they can give you advice and guidance. Obviously, it won't be as in-depth. And we'll leave this one another time so we don't do, but there's also a possibility of using, services, and external services, which are professionals at this. Obviously, that comes with a cost, and we'll discuss that in another time. But it's always something to possibly keep in mind if you're worried and you don't feel very, confident doing it by yourself. But hopefully, these videos we'll be making and are to help you, ease that, make the process be easier. But really appreciate you coming on, Justin, and shedding some very important tips. And hopefully, we will see you later on at a later stage to give us some more tips and advice and share more of experience with the whole process of immigration. But I hope that was helpful. Thanks a lot for coming on, Justin.
No problem. Happy to help. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Great. Until the next video on the Brooks Health channel, whatever you want to call it. Take care, everyone.